Hello there, kia ora. Over the weekend, the latest AUT report into media trust was released. This is a report that gets done every year, and this is the sixth year that it's been running, and it's got some fascinating results. Each year, they track trust in journalism, and they do this with a survey of just over 1,000 people who get asked 16 questions, and then some follow up focus groups are also involved. It showed that the decline in trust overall has dropped about a percentage point from last year, and that's within the margin of error. And some media outlets have increased the level of trust that they get from their audiences, like Whakaata Māori, Iwi Radio, RNZ, and the spin-off, with RNZ reclaiming the title of most trusted news brand from the Otago Daily Times, which took it last year. It also found that news avoidance here in Aotearoa is higher than overseas, while interest in the news is also higher. And that's been put down to the constant onslaught of news that you get a lot overseas that we don't tend to have here. It also showed that we tend to want more local news, international news, and to be kept up to date with politics, while we really don't like entertainment and celebrity news. Like the kind that the Herald has been spamming social media with a lot these days. It found 53% of us use Facebook, 43% of us use YouTube, 39% of us use Instagram, and 17% of us use TikTok to source news. Anyway, the most fascinating part of this for me is the new questions that they've added this year that actually asked respondents to tell us who they voted for in the 2023 general election, which it netted results that will not really shock you at all. The voters who voted for parties on the right had the highest distrust levels of media, as did voters of Te Pāti Māori. Those voters came down to how mainstream media frame Te Pāti Māori in a Pākehā-centric way, using more aggressive terms to frame what the party and its supporters do or say than they use on other parties in Parliament. In fact, they often use talking points from ACT or National as framing devices for those news stories. And parties that are full of conspiracy theorists and cookers like ACT, Democracy, New Zealand, New Zealand First, those far-right parties, they show an exponential distrust of media because the media keeps telling them that they're wrong. Because they're wrong. In fact, 25% of regular news avoiders voted for ACT. 27% of news avoiders voted for New Zealand First, preferring instead to get their news from the reckons of their mates on Facebook who are selling dried frog boner pills to see whether or not they could be seen as reliable news sources. But one of the other bits of data that we got was how these voters saw specific media outlets. Those on the far right actively distrust Stuff, RNZ, TVNZ, the Newsroom, the Herald, and the spin-off, while explicitly trusting NBR and News Talk ZB. Those who identified as centre-right also distrusted TVNZ and Stuff more than any other media outlet, while those on the left distrusted the Herald and News Talk exponentially. But overall, those on the left tended to have a wider range of media outlets that they put their trust into. And a clue to the reasons behind this can actually be found in those focus groups that they did with this. Within the focus groups, those who identified as voters for ACT called media corrupt and dishonest, far left, and nasty. A middle-aged National Party supporter thinks media is being mean to conservatives, while Labour supporters said media never challenges politicians, and another said that they constantly amplify the same voices over and over, entrenching their ideological viewpoint with audiences. What this highlights is that there is an underlying issue with people's understanding of bias within our media and the impact that our own biases have. For example, a number of focus group respondents claim media needs to report facts from all perspectives and let the audience make up their mind. Facts don't usually have perspectives, but news, like all media, is constructed to present information in a certain way. A great example is how this particular media piece that you're watching right now is framed to make ACT and New Zealand First voters come across as uninformed and willfully ignorant. That's bias in action. Because this is a piece of media, that's what we would call media bias. My personal bias is that that's obviously not true. Some of them are just racist, bigoted, and cruel. But if that bias in mainstream media doesn't align with our own, we often see that as not reporting the facts from the perspective that I agree with, therefore nullifying the facts. The reality is that due to our own personal biases, which we all have, it's very difficult to spot the actual bias in a media organization, and we're not really taught the tools that are needed to identify it. There are some great simple markers that you can use to try and identify media bias by looking at their content. If they choose to focus on individual over collective outcomes, actions, and responsibilities, the voices that they choose to platform, the focus level on business interests, how they platform religious themes, the type of emotionally charged language that they use, the topics that they cover regularly, and other platforms that they're affiliated with, and how nationalistic they appear to outsiders. And our mainstream media here in Aotearoa tends to lean right on that spectrum, but not on all topics. They tend to, but not exclusively, lean left on climate change, for example, advocating action to tackle climate change over claiming scientific uncertainty. The final question given to the focus group, though, is possibly my favourite. What can journalists do to regain public trust? Their answer? Journalism. Focusing on investigative journalism, community based, and grassroots reporting, and stop posting bullshit like who said what on Married at First Sight like it's the start of World War III. I think that's pretty solid advice.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully I can find a way out of this building.